I'm really excited to be moderating this panel today, and I am joined by five wonderful leaders and I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves, and then we will get started. So why don't we go around the screen? Andrew, you want to start?
Yeah, thanks, Don. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Weaver. I'm the Director of People Analytics with VF Corporation, and VF owns Smart Wool, Vans, a lot of other outdoor brands. Based in Raleigh, North Carolina. I've been in this space for about 17 years or so, and really looking forward to the conversation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela. I head up global people data and analytics for GSK. GSK is a biopharma company as of the recent demerger in July, and I'm based out of London, UK.
Hi, everyone. So Marc-André, I'm a Director of People Analytics at Desjardins. Desjardins is the leading cooperative financial group in Canada, and I've been there for only a year now. So just starting the practice at Desjardins, but I was in the other company in the financial sector before that.
Hi, everyone. Shujat Ahmed here. I'm part of LinkedIn. I'm a director in people analytics at LinkedIn, and I lead our future work team. I'm based out of Dublin, California, in the Bay Area.
Hey, I'm Martyn Crook. I lead people analytics for UnitedHealth Group. I've been in this role about 6 months or so, but in various analytics roles for about the last 25 years.
Excellent. Okay, well, you all have lots of experience talking about technology and in particular about employee experience. And so my first question is really around employee experience. It's been a buzzword for the last couple years. But Angela, I'm gonna ask this question to you. Do you see employee experience as an HR topic or more of a company topic?
It's a great question. So when we look at employee experience, right, I think there's a natural tendency to think that it's because it's people related, that it should be owned centrally by HR. But when you consider sort of what we're talking about, which is really looking at how employees experience the company, not just from a hiring and from an HR process perspective, but how they get work done, how they collaborate and engage with each other, you quickly realize it's much broader than HR. So I think employee experience is something where, you know, HR is an important inputter into that process, but it's absolutely a collaborative company-wide, I'd say, initiative. You need technology at the table, right, in order to implement some of the collaborative tooling. You need the business also at the table as well to talk about what are some of the ways in which we can drive productivity. You would need facilities as well. So a lot of different parts of the organization would have to come together to deliver on an amazing experience. And I think where companies might have HR facilitating the voice of the people to say this is what's working and this is what's not working, I think you'd still need to bring quite a few other capabilities into the discussion.
I can kind of jump in here too. I think, when we look at employee experience, it's not a one-time event in the employee journey, right? There's all these different milestones. So all these different groups are really, looking at this. And I think, managers especially need to really put an emphasis on it, especially in the new way that we're working, these days. So, it's a critical focus for the organization. And, really it's our position to help drive, the feedback to the managers so that they can actually create some of those actionable insights from.
Awesome. I love both of your points. Angela in particular, I do really agree with the fact that this is something that that is owned by both. And Andrew, you kind of agreed with that as well. So, this is always, I think, the next question that I think about in terms of even with an HR topic / non-HR topic, how do you demonstrate to leadership that there are tangible business outcomes to be had when you're deploying this type of human design led of processes that are really focused on the employee experience? And so how do you really show leadership that we need to do this? And so Martyn, I'm gonna pass that off to you. Maybe you can share some of your experiences on how you've been able to prove to leadership that this is a worthwhile endeavor.
I think this is probably a somewhat standard approach to say that it all starts with the little wins. So finding a couple of good examples that you can use to showcase how things have changed. The additional lens I'd sort of add to that, though, is particularly in this space, very often what we're trying to do is to create a behavior or to create an experience, and to be able to really clearly articulate what that experience is or what that behavior is and then to be able to show how things have changed or how things have improved as a result of that. It helps to be able to bring this to life and to really show the kind of experience that we're trying to build here. Then the other piece that I'd add to it is the place that we often find ourselves in today is that we're in a world where we have, a real mixture of skills, both in terms of the people who are leading experience work, or the people that are consuming it and using it too. And to the previous point, an experience program that's working well will go across the entire organization. So you couldn't possibly expect everybody to have every skill that was required. So one of the key things for success here, I think, is both in being really crisp about what that behavior should be, and then what you want people to do and the decisions that you make off the back of it. So you make it easier for them to be able to do the thing that you need them to do to prove success, than to go do things in a different way. And by doing that, I think you're able to both kind of call out, here are the things that would drive success, and then show some wins as well.
That's a great roadmap for folks that are listening, and to take that into their own organizations and to help them kind of show the value. Any of you have specific examples where you have shown leadership the value of this type of human design led?
I can add to it from a different lens, Dawn. I think what we did was we took our sentiment strategy. So looking at end-to-end employee lifecycle, what we're measuring from an employee experience perspective, and brought our C-suite, especially our CEO and our CHRO together, and said, let's look at it let's connect asking questions that help fuel LinkedIn. So strategy, execution, the talent aspect, any key priorities, and then helped bubble up how, even from our sentiment perspective, how the employee experience correlates and in some areas causes your ability to actually execute and get to strategic priorities, even communicate priorities as well. And that side to sink in why, and especially more so in the last 2 years. And if you had asked this question pre-pandemic, people would have rolled their eyes and said, yeah, sure, it makes sense. But in the last 2 years, with the pandemic, with global civic activism on like racial injustice that's happened, and people, now we're hearing quiet quitting as well, right, in the media, that it is closely tied in together. And it's not just a nice to have, it's a major company risk item as well for most companies.
And so can you tell me, Sujat, what changes did you make as a result of the listening that you've been doing?
Yeah, as much as we can share. So a couple of items around, looking at everyone was overly worked during the pandemic while we're trying to tackle a balance of well-being as well. But we're facing immense growth like most companies did in the last 2 years. So what are those specific actions, how we communicate strategy? And if the strategy is communicated, is it being executed at what pace? And is that tied in with how people are feeling belonging, well-being, how they're getting communication with their managers? And through that, we were able to take actions around how do we change very quickly in the communication of it, the prioritization of it, and where do we cut the noise, as much as we can share. But yeah, I think that led to a very different shift in how we did it, and even led to rethinking our culture and values as well, of like, what do we need to incentivize more in the company that drives results.
I'd like to jump in here if I can. So I think at GSK, we're sort of at the beginning phases, right? So we're looking at establishing a design accelerator. We're basically saying, how do we start to look at measurement of people experiences so that we can understand what drives productivity? And so we're doing that in partnership, across our global functions to say, okay, can we look at, or establishing use cases where we can say, here are opportunities where we've measured or assessed a people experience and have understood the impact that it has, either in a short-term effect or long-term, as a way of then influencing longer-term decision-making on how we start to now drive and use people experience more kind of intentionally, as opposed to a byproduct. And so still early days because we're establishing that, but I think it's been incredible in how we start to think about the testing and experimentation, because I think this is something that we're going to continue learning, especially as we get into sort of hybrid dynamics and hybrid working. We are starting to learn kind of what's working with different pockets of our people. And so all of that is kind of feeding into future decision making. So again, still early stages, but definitely something that we are establishing quite actively at the moment.
And just to jump in on Martyn, and I'll follow up with an example, but above doing a quick win, also the context is quite important, right? You need to show value, so you need to hit the mark. So it's not just about, easy win, but also impactful win. So the context is quite critical in that context. Also, for me, at least at the start, the path of least resistance is also quite important. You need to find key ally that will help you. Once you have, at the start, you have low resource, maybe not as much reputation. So using strong ally to facilitate your impact is quite important. One example is a few years ago, we had some conflict within a sector between executive about pay equity. They did perceive that someone is paying more than the other, blah, blah, blah. We know the type of dialogue here, but we were able to model the internal factor driving compensation. Once we have done that, we have facts. We have the driver of compensation, and we're able to have a proper discussion to understand, are we okay with those specific driver? We observe some difference. Are they making sense from a business point of view? So there was a dialogue of conflict for about a year or more. But going to the table, very easy. But after that discussion, around the table, I had 10 more allies that wanted to work with me, and that will ease my integration within the company. So
that's awesome. And Andrew, it seemed like you also wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great piece of this conversation, right? Because it's really trying to tie these insights that we're doing to a tangible business outcome or to revenue. I mean, if you can tie something to revenue, you tend to see things go, a little bit smoother. Martyn, I really liked what you said about, getting those quick wins and try to establish, the small things to gain momentum, because I think for a lot of us right now, there's just so much data and insights. It's like, where do you even start, right? I mean, you can kind of start looking at sales associates. Are they driving higher revenue in stores? And, what are just key drivers of employee experience? And, associates staying with the organization longer, how does that impact tenure? And pretty soon you've got this laundry list of things, and you're just like, where do I really start? So it's trying to find that smaller win and then build that momentum, for sure.
Yeah, and Andrew, it is really it's hard. It's actually hard to connect a lot of the work that we do to business outcomes, and that's something that companies really strive for. Okay, and hopefully we'll see more and more of that, as hybrid work is not just an HR problem. Okay, and that's what I love about kind of the evolution that we've been going through, is that now all of a sudden these are front and center for all of our executives to be thinking about. It's really it's kind of, I would say, a new day for us. Okay, so another thing that I think about a lot, not just at Microsoft, but I think about all the industries that Microsoft supports, and the very diverse types of industries. You have industries that have knowledge workers or retail employees, field employees, and not everyone. Employee experience is not created equally among every different type of role, every different type of industry. So Sujat, I'm gonna throw this one over to you, but how are you building great employee experience for different types of workers that I described, and designing this with equity in mind, so that all of our workers can have an exceptional employee experience?
Perfect. Thanks, John. So I would start with, we'll look at equity and equality as separate dimensions. So just like as the UN talks about this basic human rights. So I think the pandemic, and as the shift went for like remote versus hybrid, we look at equality, that there's some basic employee rights and benefits that need to be equally provided, whether it's access to benefits, access to tools, regardless of what type of worker you're in. And then the type of role kicks in, that based on your role, for instance, you're a frontline worker versus a knowledge worker, if flexibility is a benefit offered to everyone, what does that look like for you in that role? Because you may need to be in the office or may need to be front-facing more days than anyone who can be as a knowledge worker. And then we look at equity built in separately. Equity we look at as three aspects, right? It's the equity of outcomes, it's the equity of interactions, and then it's the equity of procedure. And the procedure is very dangerous because the perception of fairness is more dangerous than the fairness itself. right? Because if that goes wrong, it doesn't matter what else you're achieving. And in that equity aspect, we look at for the role types, is there some systemic bias happening because you're getting a different outcome, which could be retention, promotion, performances, compensation, belonging, well-being, and are the interactions that are happening, exposure to leadership, managers, knowledge, is that equitable as well? Is there a difference, especially now as we look at hybrid, right, for those with family responsibilities, gender, ethnicity? And then procedure. Is a procedure being followed in a way that we see that some get it and some don't, and why not? So that's how and then we've used that. Of course, it's like a carrot and a stick. The equity part is where you coach leaders and managers to bring in on how do you be stewards of the process. Whereas on the equality part, it's where HR, workplace, our technology services come in, that we make sure that our service is enabled and provided to everyone at an equal level.
Awesome. So one of the things I really like about this panel is that you all come from different types of industries. And so I would love someone else to jump in and talk about kind of your perspective based on the types of workers that you all have in your organization.
Yeah, I can jump in here quick. I'm really glad that this question came up. I mean, our workforce is made up of both, office space and hybrid workers, but more than half are retail and DC associates. And, it is a challenge, right? I mean, because you kind of see this gap, that could potentially be formed. I mean, over the last couple of years, we've all been dealing with challenges. They've been seeing a lot different challenges. So where, our Wi-Fi might be down or Zoom is kind of acting up or something. I mean, they've got a lot of other things going on. So, we really need to ensure that we're giving them a seat at the table, when we're evaluating new technologies or, developing any dashboards or any sort of solutions. And, we try and do that a lot. So we try and get a retail and DC lens on all of our survey questions, again, on different dashboard designs and what are we measuring from like a KPI standpoint. And again, just giving them a seat at the table is one step, but it's not the only thing. So the other part is like, how do we reduce the friction in the technology itself, right? So you've got people who are not in front of computers all day, right? And how do we reach them from a listening strategy standpoint? And, if there is that friction there, you're not going to get good data, which doesn't really give you good insights. So, that's a huge part of what we're looking at. So user experience and not really losing the employees in the technology solution is like a big thing that we try and talk about. Looking at how consumer grade is our technology. I mean, can you use, these platforms on a mobile device, and giving them access to things too, right? So we had a big program where we sent a lot of iPads to our DCs so that they could actually access a lot of our survey information, on that end, which was a big win. We saw really increased participation rates in, our culture and engagement surveys, just using that approach. So I really think, it's a part of our daily kind of thing that we try to reduce that complexity, because complexity does erode the value in any sort of these solutions. So, it's part of it, just giving them a seat at the table, but you also have to make sure that you're making it easier for them, to actually interact with these tools and technologies.
And I'd say even aside from iPads, just even phones, and enabling folks to use phones to be able to answer surveys and in such an intuitive and easy way, being able to talk into the phone so that it captures so that the person doesn't have to, type completely. Angela, I know at GSK there's a ton of scientists that are in labs and they're not necessarily at their computers all the time. How have you thought about this?
Same. So we've got a quite diverse workforce as well. So we've got field workers who are out in the field as part of our sales force. We have people in the manufacturing site. So, we've got tons of people in different places. And so what we've looked at is the development of personas. And then so obviously then the analysis of that to really understand, okay, so by role-based persona, what are some of the behavior patterns? What are some of the different needs and kind of expectations that these different kind of work profiles would be expecting from us? And then that's then used to help us then figure out, okay, so what does a good people experience look like if you're in a manufacturing site? What does a good people experience look like if you're in an R&D lab? And so that drives a lot of our thinking around how we then assess for things like engagement. So what does engagement look like, or what's the expectation of engagement? So the role-based personas piece is the element that we've established and developed, and using a lot of our data to learn from that as we go, especially when we're creating experiments.
Yeah, I was going to jump in on both the personas and the listening. And I'm sort of glad, Andrew, that you took it to the listening perspective, because one of the things that we're in the process of doing is looking at how we move from a survey that's, or actually from a survey to an overall listening program that has a number of components beyond the survey. And then, Angela, you kind of bookended it in a nice way to get it to have personas that are reusable and that we can be constantly learning and using to actually organize the information in a way that allows us to apply it to various different opportunities, not just the survey as we've originally thought about it. And in a organization that has a lot of different types of workers, so on top of everything else, we also have clinicians. So how you're collecting information and then putting that information in a form that's easy to use and to actually derive insights from is always going to be a challenge with that kind of multimodal collection piece.
Just maybe to complement on Angela's point with persona. So in our case, we do have branch worker, but also knowledge worker, and they have very different experience. But still within those groups, there's also quite a lot of factors that differentiate those individuals. So on our side, in order to understand their experience, we have specific employee factor that we try to follow in our analysis is included, so that we can maintain a proper understanding of the experience of certain group, but also a specific factor within those group that we know can impact their experience in our group. So.
Awesome.
Don, if I can add just a thing, I think what we found is we integrating sentiment data with behavioral data like organizational network analysis, because we found like the biggest thing that happens in equality and equity is the network gap that gets created. So taking our listening tools like Glint, for example, merging it with what we get from Viva, integrating that, we found that to be very valuable in finding a lot of pockets that we would have missed on, because sentiment only gives you like a point in time versus the actual behavior that's happening and where the inequity is happening.
Yes, you're speaking music to my ears, obviously, and that we've been doing that for a long time at Microsoft, and have found really, I would say, gold in the hills by combining sentiment data with kind of behavioral data that shows how you're spending your time and who you're connecting with, and there's a lot of good information to be learned. But we also have to think about the fact that not everyone's a knowledge worker, and so people connect in different ways, and that's really important for us as we're developing these types of programs. So Marc-André, I'm gonna shoot the next question over to you. What aspect of employee experience has improved the most in your organization by applying people analytics?
There's three main, let's say, domain of impact for employee experience with people analytics. The first mean of having an impact was through strategic business decision. People analytics help include people insight into business decision, and it's extremely helpful to do that. And afterward, those business decisions, they're better aligned with employee needs and wants. So it's going above just what we think about the business, what we see about the business, but really getting to understand our employee. Maybe an example, but often we're presented with two pathways. We focus on a threat or a opportunity. It's a simple question, which is very hard to answer properly, because we tend to be more focused on the negative information. It's a natural human bias. So we really need to apply people analytics to get a deeper understanding. Another great example, when you have two threats, right? We try to maximize, for sure, return on investment, but also return on experience. Where should we focus? In the past, and this was done before COVID, but we try to improve employee experience within a call center. The first thing that comes to mind is retention. That's the main topic. People want to maximize it. It's a big issue. Looking at the data, first of all, in our case, absenteeism had a greater impact on just productivity. Foremost, for the employee that is left afterward, having colleagues leaving the company can be replaced. If you have proper workforce management, it can be done quite quickly. But having somebody that is not there, that you need to work more to compensate, huge impact on stress level and long-term engagement of those employees that were present. So when you understand this type of phenomenon, you're able to focus where you can have the most impact. So for me, the first thing is improving business decision. It's key there. The other part is improving employee understanding. And for me, there's a distinction between understanding the employee and listening to them. Now we have a bunch of new technology that is amazing to collect more information. The UX of those tools are amazing. Still, without proper technical knowledge to extract meaning and insight from those information, we're just swamped with more data points. So that's a key aspect. Maybe just give one example, but during the pandemic, early on, we were able to identify what is the key driver for resilience after 3 months during the pandemic. And we were able to scale that throughout, let's say, less resilient part of the company, so that we could ensure that people had what they need and were ready for what was coming ahead of us. So another example also is to analyze our HR process. So do you really know how managers are allocating their bonus compensation? And not just about the process, but what is their mental process and what are they using to make that judgment? They can tell you something, they can act with something else. So is it fair? Is there any unconscious bias? And also, is there a tendency toward anchoring? We know that if you were good last year, probably you'll still be good this year. And we tend to use that to make a judgment. So for me, using PA to really understand employee, we can be more impactful with what we do. The last part is, and I feel that it's something that is usually neglected, just to improve HR or HR-related operation. There's a lot of HR tasks that can be automatized with the help of people analytics. Going from something very simple, such as a clever Excel sheet to do something, to RPA and AI. But at the end, using those techniques, you can leave HR professional, hopefully with more time to do what they're best at. And this is having a strong impact on employee experience. There's a lot of example with pay equity, using sometimes quite basic statistical model just to prioritize target group so that we can do interview, analyze deeper the market, stuff like this can be very impactful. Another example is what would be the role of an employee listening specialist without NLP and text mining? Very similar, but with a lot more reading, right? And while they're reading comment, they're not acting on those comments. So yeah, so for me, helping them with operation, it makes HR professional more human. And PA, this is an indirect impact, but I think that is quite significant and quite easy to achieve also from when you're starting in practice.
I loved how Marc-André, you explained the details of it as well. So when I think through the crisis, in the pandemic, early on realizing that this is going to be a well-being pandemic within the four walls as well. So we flexed the way we pulsed more frequently, and then tying back to we build personas around where is collaboration overload, what are those behaviors that lead you in the wrong aspect where you're going to get overworked and burned and then start just losing focus. That led to our interventions of well-being, like the programming we did around Fridays off, well-being days, and intentional programming that we then saw later on as outputs as well, that experimentation, that those worked, that helped in actually increasing people's well-being. They accounted for it. Then secondly, looking at making the decision long-term to go hybrid, we answered, should we go hybrid, which is external market insights from LinkedIn, internal on employees' preferences, but also making sure that there's this balance with the business. So we went through assessing roles in a very quantified manner to help leaders understand, to separate the person from the role and understand, can this work? Are we ready for this? So having that stance, that helped. And then now looking forward, I think going back and understanding why our people actually want to come in person and why they do not want to come in person, using that to define that we have to be very intentional in creating those meaningful interactions when people do come in person, rather than just bringing people in person so they can attend a meeting that could be a video conference. So that has changed the way our workplace, our HR, and how leaders are even thinking about when do I ask someone to come in person? What does that mean?
And I'd like to add to that. I think so. The ways in which we start to leverage people analytics is probably twofold in my world. I think employee voice is absolutely important. I think I echo and agree with all the comments made. Being able to look at active and passive channels and start to really draw conclusions around what are the really important drivers. I think some of the ways in which we've informed that has been around our hybrid working strategy. I think we really started to try to understand a little bit in terms of, when people think about belonging, is it always about proximity? So belonging, is that primarily because we're coming into an office space and sharing space together, or can we establish, belonging through the common work that we do and passion? And so, helping people to find meaning in the work that they're getting into. And so we use a lot of the employee voice in that space to kind of understand that. And I think the second space in which we start to look at people analytics influencing this conversation is around measurement, and people experience measured in particular. So are we able to start to measure people experiences in a way that helps us to inform thinking about what's really value add, what are the moments that matter from a people experience perspective, and how do we ensure that we shore up our resources to make sure that we deliver that consistently for our people. And so I think those are some of the tangible ways in which people analytics can come into the conversation around people experience.
I love those examples, and especially the connecting our sentiment data to kind of active and passive listening. So yes, as I said before, that's music to my ears when I hear that other folks are doing that as well. Okay, we're going to get to our last question. It's kind of a meaty question, but I'm excited to talk to all of you about this. So last week, Microsoft released our latest Work Trends Index report, and one of the big insights in this index report was this notion of productivity paranoia. And so, if you are not familiar with that, it's that if you ask managers if they feel like their employees are productive working from home, they'll say no. Okay, but if you actually ask employees if they feel like they are productive, they say yes. And so it's this notion where there's a mismatch, okay, in terms of what managers think is going on and then the employee's perception of what's going on. And so how do you think people analytics can play into this and help our leaders and companies really understand what is really going on?
Yeah, and it's a great question. I mean, it's a super interesting topic, right? So managers feeling like, employees are not being productive, and then employees have to try and prove that they're being productive in this, new hybrid way of working. And, all the benchmark data that you see out there, that multitasking is increasing, meetings are increasing. So, where is this disconnect and where's the gap? And, coincidentally, we do have a survey that's live actually right now. And if anyone from BF is on the call, it closes tomorrow. So I had to get that plug in there really quick. But it was designed in partnership with our well-being leadership team and really touches on, this hybrid working environment and then general well-being sentiment. And I think we'll be able to get some really good insights from that to kind of establish a baseline to guide our future approach. And if I look at how people analytics teams can really help influence this and drive that conversation forward, we need to take that human-centric, employee experience lens when we're, pulling this technology together and come at it from a place of transparency and improvement versus tracking and monitoring that big brother feel. And you kind of take your data that you get from your surveys and then, align it with what you're seeing out of that digital exhaust and bring those things together, right? Establishing the baseline, is this even a problem in our organization? If it is, to what extent? How can we measure and influence that? So, a couple of the things when you're looking at this, again, it's just really the transparency piece, I think is really big for me, in democratizing as much data as you can to the associates. And we, as people analytics leaders, have to be really mindful how we present that data back, because it's really sensitive information, and educate the hiring or the managers and the hiring teams and everyone else is just kind of saying, like, this is what this is actually saying, right? And keep in mind, these are your colleagues, from that end. So I guess, just to kind of summarize some of it, just building that continuous feedback loop, coming from this as from a place of trust, and improvement versus big brother. We're going to start monitoring how many emails you're sending and, how long you're in meetings and calls for. But then delivering those actionable insights using that combination from your listening program and then the activity that you're maybe getting from your technology, and making sure that we educate the managers for sure on that. I think this is going to be something that we're going to be looking at for the foreseeable future, with how we've developed these new ways of working. So super interesting.
So love that you brought in this kind of notion of transparency and data confidentiality and making sure that employees know what we're doing with the information. And I would also, just for all of you listeners out there, this Work Trend Index report is all about our customer. It's not Microsoft internal data. This is all about the data that we have collected with all of our customers, with their consent, of course, and so this is really learnings that we've had globally, not a statement about what's happening within Microsoft specifically.
And I would say some of the things that we've looked at is just, do we see a dip in productivity or output or revenue in any part of our business that would indicate that we've got challenges with productivity. I mean, I think, the results speak for themselves in some cases. And so the way in which we deal with that paranoia is to just look at the data, right? So if we're not seeing a dip in the areas that matter, then it's more around saying, look, there may be a loss of control and some element of, maybe anxiety with the leadership, because again, we're working in a hybrid capacity. And so some of that is an opportunity just to rethink leadership and to provide more support and how you sort of mobilize a sort of more digital workforce.
And just to quickly jump in on this, I think that all company will need to focus on what are the driver of this paranoia. Try to understand within our own manager, who have more doubt about employee productivity. Why? What do they have in common? Where are they coming from? So that we can also act on the cultural side, not just on the technology and the employee. So I think that we need to attack this subject within, on both sides.
Don, I can share how we addressed it. So we perception versus reality. So on the perception side, we get to, okay, what is the actual fear when you say productivity? Because you can say productivity, but you mean something else. So we asked ICs and managers, we broke it apart. We said, getting work done effectively and efficiently, is it about advancing knowledge, learning, creating new ideas, implementing new ideas? And when we started breaking that down, it came down to that the major disconnect was around mentorship, that part that I can just tap someone on the shoulder because they're in front of me in the office and we can share ideas. And then we said, okay, so that's the fear. Everything else works fine. It's not response time. It is execution is good. It is this part that we will miss that chemistry. And then we showcase it against taking a case study where we do have objective data like sales or customer support, and myth busting that where you're located, how frequent you come to the office, who's your manager, had no significance at all on your ability to get these results. But there were other factors that I can't share, but the other factors looking at our network that actually play into this. I think that's helped myth bust that paranoia.
I was just thinking that in my previous role, so not the role that I'm in now, I'd done some work looking at the productivity of our call centers, and the call centers as everybody went home during COVID. One of the things that was interesting was the call centers where people were starting to come back. We saw lower NPS than the call centers where people had remained at home or in some kind of hybrid working. So the data actually sort of suggested the opposite to be true, that the people who we were bringing back for some reason were creating a less positive experience for the people that they were speaking to. Now, there's a whole load of other reasons why that could happen, but it just prompted that thought that actually the data may tell us the opposite story.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I've really, really enjoyed spending the last 45 minutes with you and talking more about employee experience and the role that plays in technology and beyond.